Hi there, my name's Gordon Smith. I'm also known as Douglas Lee, the author of the book The End is Nigh Again, but this time we really mean it. It's a book about Jehovah's Witnesses. In the portion that I'm going to read today, it deals with the story of creation and of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And for me, it's one of the most bizarre biblical stories there is. Because when you analyse it, there are so many holes in the story that it begins to resemble a bit of Swiss cheese. Now, we know that the God in the Old Testament isn't the God in the New Testament. Obviously, they're different people, because the God in the New Testament that Jesus talks about is a God of love and compassion. And the God in the Old Testament is a jealous God who kills everybody. Jealous, it's an interesting word, isn't it? I am a jealous God, because you have to ask, jealous of what? And jealous of whom? Because after all, he does say, I am the one and only true God, and yet he's still jealous. So, bit of therapy needed there, I think. Okay, so here we go. The Garden of Eden. There are, however, a couple of rather embarrassing questions that raise their ugly head in this whole garden fiasco. For example, we are told that after becoming like God, the couple ran off and hid in the bushes. And later, when God came to talk to Adam, he couldn't find him. Yes, in spite of his superpowers and X-ray vision, it seems that God was unable to see through the heavy foliage of the bushes. Later, when Adam emerged, a fig leaf placed appropriately over his modesty, he explained to God that he'd been hiding out of sight because he was ashamed of his nakedness. Then, after having listened to Adam's explanation, God asked him the most bizarre question. How do you know you're naked? He inquired of him. You haven't eaten of the tree, have you? Now, one can't help but wonder how it was that God hadn't seen everything beforehand. After all, he'd only made 2 people in total, and one of them hadn't even been in the plan. Surely it couldn't have taken an awful lot of overseeing for him to keep everything in order. The question has to be asked, just where was he when all of this was kicking off in the garden? Perhaps he'd had his omniness switched off for a while, or he'd been away on holiday. And hadn't he been aware of what the devil had been up to either? If, as should have been the case, given his supposed abilities, he'd been able to see the earthly events, then one could ask, why was it that he didn't intervene and resolve things long before the actions of the few had such an irreversible and catastrophic effect on the whole of mankind? For example, he could have quite easily restarted everything, making the necessary adjustments so that that kind of thing just didn't happen again. He could have killed the devil, wiped clean the minds of Adam and Eve, and, just as a suggestion, he could have left those bloody trees out of the plans. Although that may have been a reasonable way to go forward, what actually happened was an orgy of blame, which was set into motion, in which no one seemed to be prepared to accept responsibility for what had gone on. Adam, in an attempt to save his own skin and thinking on his feet, blamed Eve, saying that she was the one who had brought him the fruit in the first place, and therefore it was all her fault. God, who was taking the fall for nothing or nobody, would have none of his excuses, and so, running out of places to point the finger, and in a moment of both desperation and stupidity, Adam put the blame back on God. He reminded him that it was he who had actually given him Eve in the first place. In itself, this line of argument had a certain truth to it, yet, for sure, Adam's logic did nothing to ingratiate him with his Maker, who with every passing moment was going further off the deep end. Desperately hurt by all this negative attention, Eve logically blamed the devil, saying that she had been totally deceived by the serpent's cunning ways and deceptive language. The devil, knowing that he had very little room to manoeuvre, kept his mouth well and truly shut. It's at this moment that we get to see more of the jaw-dropping logic of the God of the Old Testament, and a little of his unusual system of justice. The fact was that he had created everything in the first place, and therefore, in the scheme of things, it was he who should have accepted responsibility for the lot. Ignoring that completely, however, our loving Creator began to dole out a plethora of wholly imbalanced and inappropriate punishments. The devil, along with the band of angels who'd allowed themselves to be distracted by the whole naked mankind situation, were banished to the earthly plane, never to return to their heavenly home. Michael, God's right-hand man and arch-enemy of the devil, had the job of casting them out of the heavens. Adam and Eve were thrown out of the garden and sentenced to death, albeit a slow one, that was to last a lifetime. God then barred the entrance of the garden with 2 angels, who, to ensure that they were taken seriously, had a sword each that spun round in circles before them, preventing anyone slipping back whilst they were round the back having a fag. Furthermore, God condemned Adam to a life of toiling the land, which, in essence, meant that he was going to have to be a farmer. Not such an extreme punishment on the face of it. After all, lots of people become farmers and are very happy, enjoying fantastic subsidies and tax benefits, with the additional bonus of being able to shoot at strangers while shouting, "Here, get off my land!" Notably, Eve didn't enjoy quite the same treatment as Adam, and in his anger, God cursed her with the pain of childbirth, as well as telling her that she would be ruled by man forever. During the millennia that followed that harsh castigation, and even to this day, many religions have used that particular passage of the Bible as an excuse to subjugate women, labelling them as second-class citizens, and in some countries even as low as third class. Note, in the UK, for example, women are okay, but man's best friend is still his dog. If that weren't sufficient, the menstrual cycle, labelled the curse by many faiths, is considered to be the direct result of God's punishment of Eve. An interesting spin-off, however, and one that God probably wasn't aware of at the time, was that the pre- and post-menstrual tension that women suffer seems to have a direct effect on men. And so it's the boyfriends, husbands, and any male within striking distance that most times suffer its consequences. If anything, women tend to be nothing more than conduits to what we could describe as a period of extreme self-expression, whilst men are more on the receiving end of those strange 48 hours of emotional fallout. So perhaps in retrospect, God got something right, even if it was by accident. Thank you. I'll post some more later on.